After a night with Mistress, husband woke to find wife gone, and his entire fortune transferred. The Los Angeles heat clung to the night like a guilty secret, thick and suffocating. Neon lights from the cheap motel flickered against the cracked asphalt as Hudson Blake stepped out of his silver BMW, his wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent glow for just a moment before he shoved his hand deep into his pocket. At 37, Hudson carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he had mastered life's game. His tailored suit, expensive cologne, and perfectly styled hair painted the picture of success, a financial manager who commanded respect in boardrooms and whose signature moved millions. Tonight, however, he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or investment portfolios. Tonight was about Deborah. She emerged from the passenger seat with calculated grace, her red dress hugging every curve as she moved toward the motel entrance. Deborah Harris was 29 and stunning in the way that stopped traffic and destroyed marriages. Her dark hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and her smile held promises that had been driving Hudson to madness for the past 8 months. Room 237, she purred, dangling the key between manicured fingers. Just like you requested. Hudson's heart hammered against his ribs as they climbed the external staircase. Each step felt like a betrayal, yet he couldn't stop, wouldn't stop. The thrill of secrecy, the intoxicating rush of forbidden desire, it all felt too good to resist. Inside the cramped room, Deborah moved with practiced efficiency, dimming the lights and uncorking a bottle of champagne she'd brought in her oversized purse. The cheap furniture and faded wallpaper faded into background noise as she handed him a plastic cup filled with bubbling liquid. "To us," she whispered, pressing her body against his. "To us," Hudson echoed, his voice thick with anticipation and guilt. As they drank, Hudson felt the familiar loosening of his tongue that came with alcohol and adrenaline. He'd been carrying a secret for 2 weeks now, a secret so massive it threatened to burst from his chest every time he looked at Tina across the breakfast table. "You know what's crazy?" he slurred, setting down his empty cup and pulling Deborah closer. 2 weeks ago, I was just another middle management guy worried about mortgage payments." Deborah's eyes sharpened with interest, though her smile remained perfectly seductive. "What changed?" Hudson's laugh was slightly hysterical. "I won the damn lottery, Deb, can you believe it? $15.7 million. After taxes, it's still more money than I ever dreamed of having." Deborah's breathing quickened, but not for the reasons Hudson assumed. "That's incredible, baby. You must be so excited." "I haven't even told Tina yet," he continued, oblivious to the predatory gleam in Deborah's eyes. "I wanted to surprise her, but then I thought, why rush? Maybe I should enjoy this feeling a little longer, you know? Just me knowing. Just us knowing. Our little secret," Deborah murmured, running her fingers through his hair. What Hudson didn't notice was how intently Deborah watched as he fumbled with his phone, entering his banking app password with clumsy, alcohol-impaired fingers. She memorized every digit, 08152024. His birthday and Tina's joined together in digital harmony, a password that represented the very marriage he was betraying. 25 miles away, in their modest 2-bedroom house in Sherman Oaks, Tina Blake sat on the edge of their marital bed, staring at her husband's empty pillow. At 33, she possessed the kind of quiet beauty that deepened with time. Gentle brown eyes, shoulder-length auburn hair, and a smile that could light up rooms when it was genuine. Tonight, that smile was nowhere to be found. She'd found the credit card statement that afternoon, hidden beneath a stack of investment reports in Hudson's desk drawer. The Riverside Motel. The same charge, appearing every Thursday for the past 2 months. The same day Hudson claimed to have late client meetings. Tina wasn't naive. She'd suspected something was wrong for weeks. The way Hudson's phone buzzed constantly, how he showered immediately upon coming home, the distant look in his eyes when she tried to talk about their future. But seeing the evidence spelled out in black and white had been like swallowing broken glass. She moved through their bedroom with mechanical precision, pulling items from drawers and folding them neatly into her largest suitcase. Wedding photos went face down in a box. Personal documents disappeared into a manila envelope. Her grandmother's jewelry, the pieces Hudson had never bothered to notice, wrapped carefully in tissue paper. The house felt like a museum now, full of artifacts from a marriage that had died without ceremony. Every shared memory seemed tainted, every laugh they'd shared now echoing with hollow mockery. As the clock struck midnight, Tina placed her wedding ring on Hudson's nightstand, next to a folded piece of paper. Her handwriting was steady despite the earthquake in her chest. You didn't lose me tonight. You lost who you chose to stop being. She took one last look around the room they'd shared for 8 years, then picked up her suitcase and walked toward the door. Hudson Blake was about to discover that some betrayals cost more than money. They cost everything. Hudson's eyes cracked open to harsh sunlight streaming through threadbare motel curtains. His head pounded with the dull ache of cheap champagne and expensive mistakes. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed an accusatory 11:47 a.m. He was already 3 hours late for work. Beside him, Deborah stirred with theatrical grace, her hair somehow still perfect despite their night of passion. She stretched like a cat, allowing the thin sheet to slip strategically as she turned to face him. "Good morning, handsome," she purred, trailing a finger down his chest. "Last night was incredible." Hudson's smile felt automatic, practiced. Yeah, it was. But even as he said it, something cold was creeping into his stomach. The harsh morning light made everything feel different, cheaper, dirtier. The magic of forbidden romance had evaporated with the darkness. "I should get home," he muttered, already reaching for his scattered clothes. "Tina will be wondering where I am." Deborah's expression flickered for just a moment, something calculating and cold, before the seductive mask slipped back into place. "Of course, baby. Your wife." The way she said wife made Hudson's skin crawl, though he couldn't quite articulate why. He dressed quickly, avoiding eye contact, suddenly desperate to escape the suffocating room that had seemed so exciting the night before. "I'll call you," he said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "I'll be waiting," Deborah replied, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. The drive home to Sherman Oaks felt longer than usual. Hudson's BMW cruised through familiar neighborhoods, past the coffee shop where he and Tina had their first date, past the park where they'd talked about buying a house someday. Every landmark felt like an accusation. He pulled into their driveway at 12:43 p.m., noting with relief that Tina's Honda Civic was gone. Good. She was probably at work, which meant he could shower and change clothes before facing her inevitable questions about where he'd been. But as soon as he approached the front door, something felt wrong. It was too quiet. Usually, Tina left the kitchen radio playing, a habit that had annoyed him for years but now seemed ominous in its absence. The morning newspaper lay untouched on the doorstep, still wrapped in its plastic sleeve. Hudson's key turned in the lock with its familiar click, but when he pushed the door open, the silence that greeted him was absolute. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty house, but something deeper, something final. "Tina," he called, his voice echoing strangely in the hallway. "Honey, are you home?" No response. He moved through the living room, noting details that his guilt-addled brain tried to dismiss. The family photos were gone from the mantelpiece. The throw pillows Tina had made herself, the ones he'd always complained were too colorful, had vanished from the sofa. In the kitchen, the morning dishes sat clean and dry in the rack, as if she'd washed them hours ago. But the coffee maker was cold and empty, and Tina always made coffee. Always. That's when he saw it. On the kitchen table, placed with deliberate precision next to the napkin holder they'd received as a wedding gift, sat Tina's wedding ring. The simple gold band caught the afternoon light, casting a small, accusing shadow across the wooden surface. Beneath it was a folded piece of paper, his name written across the front in Tina's careful handwriting. Hudson's hands shook as he picked up the note. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with 8 years of marriage and a lifetime of dreams he'd never bothered to protect. "Hudson, you didn't lose me tonight. You lost who you chose to stop being. I know about the motel. I know about her. I know about all the lies you thought I was too stupid to see. I won't beg you to choose me over her because you already made that choice months ago. I won't scream or break things or make a scene, because that's not who I am. I'm leaving because I finally remembered who I was before I spent so many years trying to be enough for someone who didn't want to be enough for me. Don't look for me. Don't call me. Don't pretend you're sorry when what you're really sorry about is getting caught. The house is yours. The bills are yours. The emptiness is yours. I hope she's worth it." Tina Hudson read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. His legs gave out and he collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs. The same chairs where they'd shared thousands of meals, where they'd planned their future, where she'd waited for him to come home while he was busy destroying everything they'd built. "No, no, no," he whispered, grabbing his phone with trembling fingers. He dialed Tina's number, but it went straight to a message saying the number was no longer in service. Panic rising in his throat, he raced upstairs to their bedroom. The sight that greeted him there made his knees buckle. Her side of the closet was completely empty. Not just empty, cleaned out with surgical precision. Even the hangers were gone. The dresser drawers hung open like gaping mouths, stripped of everything that had made this room theirs instead of just his. The photographs were gone from her nightstand, the books she'd been reading, the small jade plant she'd nursed for 3 years. Even her pillow was missing, leaving only the depression where her head had rested beside his for 8 years. Hudson sank onto the bed, still clutching the note, and for the first time in his adult life, he began to cry. Not the frustrated tears of a man who didn't get his way, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone who had just realized he'd thrown away the only thing that had ever truly mattered. Outside, the Los Angeles afternoon stretched on, indifferent to his anguish. Somewhere in this vast city, his wife was starting a new life. Somewhere else, his mistress was probably already planning her next move. And Hudson Blake, for the first time in years, was completely alone. His phone buzzed with a text from Deborah. "Missing you already, baby. When can I see you again?" Hudson stared at the message, then slowly set the phone face down on the empty nightstand. He was about to discover that losing a wife was only the beginning of his problems. 3 days had passed since Hudson found the empty house, and he felt like he was drowning in slow motion. He'd called in sick to work, something he'd never done in his 15-year career, and spent every waking hour trying to track down any trace of Tina. Her sister Jessica hung up on him twice before finally answering his third call. "She doesn't want to talk to you, Hudson." Jessica's voice was ice cold through the phone. "And honestly, I don't blame her. Jess, please. I know I messed up, but..." "Messed up?" Jessica's laugh was bitter. "You destroyed an 8-year marriage for some cheap thrill. That's not a mess up, Hudson, that's a choice. I can fix this, I just need to talk to her. There's nothing to fix. She's done. We all saw this coming except you." The line went dead. Hudson tried Tina's workplace next, driving to the small accounting firm where she'd worked as a bookkeeper for the past 4 years. But when he arrived, her desk was already cleared out, a temp sitting in her chair. "Ms. Blake gave her notice on Monday," the office manager explained with professional detachment. "She said it was a family matter, very sudden. Did she leave a forwarding address? Emergency contact?" The woman's expression softened slightly with pity. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blake. Even if she had, I couldn't share that information." By Thursday evening, desperation had driven Hudson to do something he'd sworn he'd never do. He went to his mother-in-law's house. Barbara Martinez answered the door with the same expression she might have worn if she'd found a rat on her doorstep. At 62, Tina's mother had never liked Hudson much, but she'd tolerated him for her daughter's sake. That tolerance had apparently expired. "You have some nerve showing up here," Barbara said, not bothering to invite him in. "Mrs. Martinez, I know you're angry, but I need to find Tina. I need to make this right." "Make it right?" Barbara stepped onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind her. "You humiliated my daughter. You made her feel like she wasn't enough when she was everything you ever deserved and more. I know I made mistakes." "Don't." Barbara's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "Don't you dare minimize what you did. Tina came here 3 nights ago, and you know what she said? She said she felt stupid for believing in you for so long." The words hit Hudson like physical blows. "Where is she? Please, I just need to talk to her. She's somewhere you'll never find her, starting over like she should have done years ago." Barbara stepped closer, her eyes blazing with maternal fury. "And if you have any decency left, which I doubt, you'll leave her alone." "But I love her." "No, you don't." Barbara's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it worse. "If you loved her, you never would have put her through this. Love protects. Love honors. Love doesn't sneak around cheap motels with trashy women." Hudson watched helplessly as Barbara turned and walked back into the house, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place echoing like a gunshot. Defeated and desperate for any kind of comfort, Hudson found himself driving to Deborah's apartment in West Hollywood. She opened the door wearing a silk robe that left little to the imagination, her hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. "Hudson," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his neck. "I've been worried sick. You haven't returned my calls. I've been dealing with complications," he muttered, allowing her to pull him inside. The apartment was smaller than his house, but expensively decorated. Designer furniture, original art, fresh flowers that must have cost more than most people spent on groceries. Hudson had never bothered to ask how Deborah afforded such luxuries on her administrative assistant's salary. "Poor baby," Deborah purred, guiding him to the leather sofa. "Let me make you a drink, you look terrible." As she moved to the bar cart, Hudson noticed how comfortable she seemed, how prepared. 2 glasses were already sitting out, as if she'd been expecting him. A bottle of his favorite whiskey, the expensive stuff he only bought for special occasions, sat open and ready. "How did you know I'd come?" he asked. Deborah's smile was dazzling. "I know you better than you think, Hudson. I know what you need." She handed him a generous pour of whiskey and curled up beside him, her hand resting possessively on his thigh. "Tell me what's wrong." "Tina's gone," Hudson said, the words tasting like ash. "She found out about us somehow. She left, and I can't find her anywhere." "Oh, sweetheart." Deborah's voice was honey-sweet, but something flickered behind her eyes, something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. "I'm so sorry. That must be devastating. I don't know what to do. Everyone blames me. Everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster." "You're not a monster," Deborah said, her fingers stroking his arm. "You're just a man who finally found what he was looking for. Sometimes we have to lose the wrong thing to find the right thing." Hudson wanted to protest that Tina wasn't the wrong thing, but the whiskey and Deborah's touch were making it hard to think clearly. "I just never imagined she'd actually leave." "Maybe it's for the best," Deborah suggested carefully. "I mean, if she really loved you, wouldn't she fight for your marriage? Wouldn't she try to understand that these things happen?" The logic was twisted, but in his current state, Hudson found himself nodding. I guess I thought she'd at least give me a chance to explain. Some people are just too rigid to forgive," Deborah continued, her voice growing more confident. "Too proud to see that love isn't always neat and simple. But you and we understand each other." As she spoke, Hudson noticed her phone buzzing with notifications on the coffee table. The screen lit up briefly, showing what looked like banking apps and financial websites. But before he could focus on it, Deborah was kissing his neck, her hands working to loosen his tie. "Forget about her tonight," she whispered against his skin. "Let me help you forget." And because he was weak, because he was lost, because facing the magnitude of what he'd destroyed was too overwhelming, Hudson let her. But as Deborah led him toward her bedroom, neither of them noticed the small camera positioned discreetly on her bookshelf, its red recording light blinking steadily in the darkness. Some predators like to document their victories. Hudson woke up in Deborah's bed with sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the distant sound of traffic humming below. For a brief, disorienting moment, he felt almost peaceful, until reality crashed over him like a cold wave. Tina was gone. His marriage was over, and he was lying in another woman's bed, proving every terrible thing his wife probably thought about him. Beside him, Deborah was already awake, scrolling through her phone with an expression of intense concentration. She didn't notice him stirring until he shifted to check the time on his own device. "Good morning, handsome," she said, but her usual sultry tone seemed distracted. "Sleep well?" "Yeah, I guess." Hudson sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I should probably head home. I've got to figure out what I'm going to do about work and—" "Actually," Deborah interrupted, setting her phone aside with deliberate care. "There's something I need to tell you, something important." Something in her voice made Hudson's stomach clench. "What is it?" Deborah took a deep breath, and when she looked at him, her eyes were bright with what looked like excitement barely contained beneath a mask of concern. "I've been thinking about what you told me the other night about your lottery winnings." Hudson's blood turned to ice. "What about them?" "Well, honey, I think you should check your accounts. Like, right now." "Why? What are you talking about?" But even as he asked, Hudson was already reaching for his phone, his hands trembling as he opened his banking app. The password screen appeared, and he typed in the familiar numbers with muscle memory. The balance that appeared made him certain he was still dreaming. 0. Every account. Checking. Savings. Even his emergency fund. All of them showed the same impossible number. 0. That's not right, Hudson whispered, refreshing the page frantically. "This has to be a mistake. The bank's system must be down or—" "Hudson," Deborah's voice was gentle, almost pitying. "Look at the transaction history." With numb fingers, Hudson scrolled to the recent activity. What he saw there made the room spin around him. Transfer to external account. $15,700,000 Nor's date. Yesterday, 3:47 a.m. Authorization code. Approved. "No," Hudson breathed. "No, this is impossible. Nobody else knows my password. Nobody could have—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes snapping to Deborah's face. She was watching him with an expression he'd never seen before. Calm, calculating, and completely devoid of the loving concern she'd shown just moments ago. "You," he whispered. Deborah's smile was radiant. "Me? But how did you— I never told you." "Oh, sweetheart." Deborah laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "You told me everything. The night you were so drunk and so proud of your big win, you typed your password right in front of me. Twice. 08/15/2024, your birthday and dear Tina's birthday, all squished together. So romantic." Hudson lunged for his phone, dialing the bank's emergency line with shaking fingers. "This is fraud. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead," Deborah said casually, stretching like a satisfied cat. "Tell them how your mistress stole the lottery money you were hiding from your wife. I'm sure that'll go over well." The bank's automated system connected Hudson to a customer service representative after an endless hold. "Sir, I see the large transfer you're calling about. Our records show it was authorized using the correct password and verified through the secondary authentication you set up." "Secondary authentication? What secondary authentication?" "The security question you established. Mother's maiden name. Harris." Hudson's mouth fell open as he stared at Deborah. "You told me Harris was your last name." "It is. It's also what you put down as your mother's maiden name when I suggested you update your security settings last month, remember? You were so stressed about work, and I said I'd help you organize your financial information. You thought it was so sweet that I cared about your security." The phone slipped from Hudson's nerveless fingers. "You planned this. All of it. Every single detail." Deborah stood up, wrapping a silk robe around her naked form with theatrical grace. "The seduction, the secret relationship, even the hotel receipts I made sure would end up where your wife would find them. Did you really think a woman like me would be interested in a middle-aged financial manager with a receding hairline and a dad bod? You said you loved me. I loved your bank account." Past tense. Deborah moved to her dresser and began pulling out clothes with businesslike efficiency. "You were so desperate to feel desired, so eager to believe that a younger woman found you irresistible. It was almost too easy." Hudson felt like he was drowning. "Give me back my money." "What money?" "As far as the bank knows, you transferred that money to an account you set up yourself. The IP address traces back to your home computer. I made sure to use your Wi-Fi when I set everything up." "I'll tell them you forced me. I'll report you." "For what? Having a consensual relationship with a married man? Using information he willingly gave me?" Deborah's laugh was genuinely amused now. "Hudson, sweetheart, you're not the victim here. You're just a cheater who got out-cheated." As the reality of his situation sank in, Hudson felt his legs give out. He collapsed onto the edge of the bed, his entire world crumbling around him. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" Deborah paused in her dressing to look at him with something that might have been pity. "Because men like you think you can have everything. A loving wife at home, and a hot mistress on the side. You think you're so clever, so special, that the rules don't apply to you." She moved closer, crouching down so they were at eye level. "But here's the thing about men like you. You're so busy looking at what you think you want that you can't see what's right in front of you. You had a woman who loved you unconditionally, and you threw her away for what? For this? I thought you cared about me. I care about a lot of things. Financial security, designer handbags, a nice apartment and a good neighborhood. You were just the means to an end." Deborah stood and gathered her purse, keys, and a small overnight bag that had been sitting by the door. Packed and ready, Hudson realized with dawning horror. "Where are you going?" "Somewhere warm. Somewhere far away from here. Somewhere you'll never find me." She paused at the door, looking back at him with mock sympathy. "Don't feel too bad, Hudson. You're not the first married man to fall for this, and you won't be the last. You're just the one who happened to have the biggest bank account." The door closed with a soft click, leaving Hudson alone in the apartment of a woman who had never existed. 300 miles away, in a small apartment in San Diego, Tina Blake was unpacking the last box of her belongings. She'd driven south on impulse, choosing the coastal city because she and Hudson had always talked about retiring there someday, a dream that now belonged only to her. The apartment was modest but clean, with large windows that let in the California sunshine. She'd found a job at a local law firm, nothing glamorous but honest work that would pay the bills while she figured out her next steps. As she arranged her grandmother's china in the small kitchen cabinet, Tina felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The constant anxiety of wondering where her husband was, of making excuses for his behavior, of pretending their marriage wasn't dying, all of that was gone. Her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and smiled for the first time in weeks. Hi, Jessica. Hey, honey. How's the new place? It's perfect, Tina said, and meant it. Small but perfect. Any word from Hudson? Tina's expression hardened slightly. He's been calling everyone, trying to find me. Mom said he came by the house. Are you going to talk to him? No. Tina's voice was firm. There's nothing left to say. He made his choice. As she hung up and returned to unpacking, Tina didn't know that 200 miles north, the man who had thrown away her love was discovering that karma had a sense of irony. But she was about to find out that some storms, even when you think you've escaped them, have a way of following you home. Hudson sat in his car outside Deborah's apartment building for 3 hours waiting for her to return. When the building manager finally approached to ask if he needed help, Hudson realized she was never coming back. The next few days blurred together in a haze of phone calls, bank visits, and police reports that went nowhere. Every official he spoke to gave him the same sympathetic but useless response. Technically, no crime had been committed. The money had been transferred using legitimate access credentials. The relationship had been consensual. Deborah Harris, if that was even her real name, had simply vanished with the efficiency of a professional. By Friday morning, Hudson's absence from work had triggered a concerned call from his supervisor, Richard Fleming. Hudson, what the hell is going on? You've missed 3 days without explanation. Davidson Industries is breathing down my neck about the quarterly projections you were supposed to deliver. Hudson sat in his empty kitchen, staring at the place where Tina's coffee mug used to sit. I've been dealing with a family emergency. What kind of emergency requires you to completely disappear? And don't tell me it's about your wife leaving you, because half the office already knows about that. The words hit Hudson like a slap. What do you mean half the office knows? Come on, Hudson. You think people didn't notice you taking long lunches, getting mysterious phone calls, acting distracted for months? Sarah in accounting said she saw you at that motel on Riverside Drive with some brunette. Word travels fast in a place like this. Hudson's humiliation was complete. Not only had he lost his marriage and his fortune, but now his professional reputation was in ruins. Richard, I can explain. You know what? Don't. Just come in Monday with the Davidson projections finished and your head screwed on straight. And Hudson, figure out your personal life before it destroys what's left of your career. The line went dead. That afternoon, Hudson forced himself to go grocery shopping, a task Tina had always handled. The simple act of navigating the aisles, trying to remember what they usually bought, felt like walking through a museum of his former life. He was debating between 2 brands of pasta sauce when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Hudson? Hudson Blake? He turned to see Margaret Flores, one of Tina's friends from her book club, pushing a cart loaded with organic produce and artisanal breads. Margaret had never particularly liked Hudson, and the expression on her face suggested that his recent behavior hadn't improved her opinion. Oh, hi, Margaret. I heard about what happened. About Tina. Margaret's voice was carefully controlled, but Hudson could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. It's complicated, Hudson said weakly. Is it? Because it seems pretty simple from where I stand. You cheated on one of the kindest women I've ever known, and now she's had to start her life over because of your selfish choices. Other shoppers were beginning to notice the conversation, some slowing their carts to eavesdrop. Hudson felt his face burning with embarrassment. Margaret, I'd rather not discuss this here. Why? Worried about what people will think? Bit late for that, don't you think? Margaret's voice was rising slightly, drawing even more attention. Do you have any idea what you put her through? The humiliation? The self-doubt? She spent months wondering what was wrong with her, why her husband didn't want to come home anymore. I never meant for her to get hurt. But you didn't mean for her not to get hurt either, did you? You just didn't think about her at all. An elderly woman nearby was openly staring now, her expression scandalized. A mother with 2 young children hurried past, shooting Hudson a disgusted look. He felt like he was standing in a spotlight, every poor choice he'd made on display for judgment. She's better off without you, Margaret continued, and I hope you realize that before it's too late to learn anything from this mess you've made. She pushed her cart away, leaving Hudson standing alone among the pasta sauces, feeling like the entire store was watching him, which, he realized with growing horror, they probably were. The weekend brought no relief. Hudson tried to lose himself in work, but the Davidson projections required focus he couldn't muster. Every time he opened his laptop, memories of Deborah using his Wi-Fi to steal his money flooded back, making concentration impossible. Sunday evening, his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, Hudson saw Dave Martinez, his neighbor of 6 years, holding a casserole dish and wearing an expression of uncomfortable obligation. "Hey, Dave," Hudson said, opening the door. "What's up?" "Linda made too much lasagna," Dave said, holding out the dish. "Thought you might want some. Since you know Tina's not around to cook anymore." "That's really nice of her, thank you." Dave shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Hudson, I don't want to get into your business, but the whole neighborhood's been talking. About the separation. About why Tina left." Hudson's heart sank. "What are they saying?" "That you were running around on her. That she found out and had to leave her own home because of the shame." Dave's expression was genuinely sympathetic, but also disappointed. "Man, we all liked Tina. She was good people, always helping with the block parties, bringing cookies when someone was sick. It's hard to understand how someone could mess up a good thing like that. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Maybe not, but it did happen, and now everyone knows. My wife can't even look at you without getting angry. Says you remind her of her first husband, the one who broke her heart with his cheating." After Dave left, Hudson ate the lasagna alone at his kitchen table, the silence of the house pressing down on him like a weight. Every empty chair, every missing photograph, every space where Tina's belongings used to be served as a reminder of what he'd lost. Meanwhile, in San Diego, Tina was having dinner with her new co-workers at a small Italian restaurant near the beach. The law firm had welcomed her warmly, and she was slowly beginning to build new friendships. "So you just packed up and left Los Angeles?" asked Jennifer, one of the paralegals. "That takes guts." "Sometimes staying takes more guts than leaving," Tina replied, twirling pasta around her fork. "I spent too many years making excuses for someone else's behavior. At some point you have to stop hoping things will change and start changing things yourself." "What about your ex-husband? Does he know where you are?" "No, and I intend to keep it that way." Tina's voice was firm, but not bitter. "Some doors, once you close them, should stay closed." The conversation moved on to lighter topics, but later that night, as Tina walked along the beach near her apartment, she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. The sound of waves washing against the shore seemed to carry away the last remnants of her old life, leaving space for something new to grow. She didn't know that 300 miles north, Hudson was sitting in his empty house, staring at his phone and wondering if he had the courage to admit to himself that the best thing in his life had been right there all along, until he threw it away with both hands. The hardest lesson, Tina reflected as she turned back toward her apartment, was learning that some people only recognize the value of love after they've proven they don't deserve it. Hudson was about to learn that lesson in ways he never could have imagined. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Hudson sat in his BMW outside the Davidson Industries building, staring up at the gleaming glass facade where he'd once felt important, respected, successful. Now the building seemed to tower over him like a monument to everything he'd lost. The Davidson projection sat unfinished on his laptop, a testament to his complete inability to function since his world had collapsed. He'd tried working on them over the weekend, but every number seemed to blur together, every spreadsheet a reminder of the millions he'd lost to Deborah's scheme. Richard Fleming was waiting in Hudson's cubicle when he arrived, his expression grim. "Conference room now," Richard said without preamble. Hudson's stomach dropped. He'd known this was coming, but the reality still hit him like a physical blow. He followed Richard through the maze of desks, aware that his co-workers were watching with a mixture of curiosity and pity. In the conference room, Human Resources Director Janet Walsh sat beside a stack of paperwork that Hudson recognized with sinking dread. "Hudson, please sit down," Janet said, her tone professionally sympathetic. "We need to discuss your recent performance issues. I know I've been distracted, but I can get back on track." "The Davidson Industries account has been reassigned," Richard interrupted. "They specifically requested a different project manager after you missed 3 consecutive meetings and failed to deliver the quarterly analysis they needed for their board presentation." Hudson felt the walls closing in. Davidson Industries was his biggest client, the account that had earned him his last 2 promotions. "Richard, if you could just give me another chance. There have been other complaints," Janet continued, consulting her notes. "Questions about your judgment, your reliability, and frankly, Hudson, your personal situation has become a distraction for the entire department." "My personal situation?" "Everyone knows about the affair, Hudson. About your wife leaving. About whatever financial troubles you're having that required you to ask for an advance on your salary." Janet's voice remained professional, but Hudson could hear the judgment underneath. "This is a small company. When one person's drama affects the entire workplace dynamic, we have to act." The salary advance. Hudson had forgotten about that humiliating conversation from 3 weeks ago, when he'd realized his credit cards were maxed out, and he desperately needed cash to pay for the hotel rooms. At the time, it had seemed like a minor request. Now he understood it was just another nail in his professional coffin. "Are you firing me?" "We're offering you the opportunity to resign," Richard said. "Clean slate, neutral reference, 2 weeks severance. It's more generous than you probably deserve given the circumstances." Hudson looked at the resignation letter sitting on the table, his name already typed at the bottom, waiting only for his signature. 15 years of building his career, and it all came down to this. A form letter and 2 weeks' pay. What if I refuse to sign? Then we'll have to document the performance issues, the missed deadlines, the unprofessional conduct. That becomes part of your permanent employment record. Janet's meaning was clear. Sign now and preserve some shred of dignity, or be fired with cause and make finding another job infinitely harder. Hudson picked up the pen with trembling fingers and signed his name, each letter feeling like a small death. That afternoon, Hudson sat in his BMW in the company parking lot, a cardboard box of personal belongings in the passenger seat. 15 years condensed into a few framed photos, a coffee mug and a desk plant that was already wilting. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw you leaving Davidson with a box. Rough day?" "A friend." Hudson's blood ran cold. Someone had been watching him. Someone knew about his humiliation. He looked around the parking lot but saw only the usual cars and office workers heading home for the day. Another text arrived. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me. For now." Hudson's hands shook as he typed back. "Who is this?" The response came immediately. "Someone who knows about you and Deborah. Someone who has pictures. Interested in keeping them private. Blackmail." On top of everything else, someone was trying to blackmail him. Hudson almost laughed at the absurdity of it. What could they possibly threaten to take away from him that he hadn't already lost? "I don't have any money," he typed back. "We'll see about that. Check your email tonight." The drive home felt like a funeral procession. Hudson's neighborhood, once a source of pride, now felt like a gauntlet of judgment. He could see curtains twitching as he passed, neighbors who once waved now turning away. Inside his empty house, Hudson poured himself a glass of whiskey, the cheap stuff now since he could no longer afford the good bottles, and opened his laptop to check his email. The message was there, sent from an anonymous account. Hudson Blake Professional Misconduct Documentation Package. The attachment contained photos, dozens of them. Hudson entering the Riverside Motel. Hudson kissing Deborah in the parking lot. Hudson's BMW parked outside her apartment at all hours. Some were taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. Others seemed to be from security cameras. But the worst ones were inside the motel room itself. Screenshots from what appeared to be a hidden camera, showing Hudson and Deborah in intimate moments, his face clearly visible while hers remained conveniently obscured. The accompanying message was brief. $50,000 keeps these private. You have 1 week to find the money. Payment instructions to follow. Hudson slammed the laptop shut and put his head in his hands. $50,000 might as well have been $50 million. His savings were gone, his credit cards maxed out, his income now zero. Even if he wanted to pay, he had no way to get that kind of money. Unless, the thought crept into his mind like poison, the house. It was the only asset he had left, the only thing of value in his name. He could take out a second mortgage or even sell it outright. The real estate market in Sherman Oaks was strong. He could probably get enough to pay the blackmailer and have something left over to start again somewhere else. But selling the house meant admitting that this was permanent, that Tina was never coming back, that the life they'd built together was truly over. 300 miles away, Tina was working late at her new job, helping to prepare documents for a complicated divorce case. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was rebuilding her life by helping other people navigate the legal maze of broken marriages. "You don't have to stay so late," said Thomas Webb, one of the senior partners. "The Davidson deposition isn't until next week." "I don't mind," Tina replied, looking up from her computer. "I like staying busy. It helps me focus." Thomas studied her with the kind of perception that made him an excellent lawyer. "How are you settling in? Really? Better than I expected. It's strange starting over at 33, but also liberating. I spent so many years trying to save something that was already broken. Now I get to build something new. Any regrets?" Tina considered the question carefully. "I regret staying as long as I did. I regret making excuses for behavior I never should have tolerated. But leaving? No, that's the best decision I've made in years. As she spoke, her phone buzzed with a notification, a social media alert. Someone had tagged her in a post. She ignored it, but Thomas noticed her slight frown. Everything okay? Just my old life trying to follow me into my new one. But that's okay. I'm stronger now than I was then. What Tina didn't know was that the social media post was from Jessica, her sister, sharing news that was spreading through their old social circle like wildfire. Hudson Blake had been fired from Davidson Industries amid rumors of financial scandal and professional misconduct. The dominoes were still falling, and Hudson was about to discover that when you destroy everything in your life, the rubble has a way of burying you alive. But sometimes, Tina reflected as she turned back to her work, being buried is just the first step toward being reborn. Hudson stared at the real estate agent's business card for 3 hours before finally making the call. Rebecca Martinez had sold houses in Sherman Oaks for 20 years, and her voice carried the practiced sympathy of someone who'd seen plenty of desperate sellers. "I understand you're interested in listing your property quickly," she said, as they walked through the house 2 days later. "May I ask about the timeline? Are you relocating for work?" Hudson couldn't bring himself to explain the real reason. "Family situation. I need to liquidate assets as soon as possible." Rebecca's trained eye took in the details. The missing photographs, the half-empty rooms, the general air of abandonment that clung to the house like dust. She'd seen this before. Divorce sales, usually messy and painful. "The market's strong right now," she said diplomatically. "But for a quick sale, you'll need to price it competitively. Are you thinking about staging it, or?" "I just need it gone. Whatever it takes." Rebecca quoted a number that made Hudson's heart sink. After the mortgage balance, closing costs, and her commission, he'd be left with maybe $40,000. Enough to pay the blackmailer, but not enough to start over anywhere decent. "There's one more thing," Hudson said, as Rebecca prepared to leave. "I need this listing to be discreet. No social media marketing, no online photos, just MLS listings." Rebecca's expression grew concerned. "Mr. Blake, that's going to significantly limit our buyer pool. In today's market, most people start their search online. Without digital marketing, I'll take the lower offers. I just can't have this sale publicized." After Rebecca left, Hudson sat in his empty living room and tried to imagine explaining to Tina, if he ever saw her again, that he'd sold their home to pay blackmail money for his affair. The irony was suffocating. He was destroying their last shared asset to cover up the crime that had destroyed their marriage. The blackmail emails continued to arrive with clockwork precision. Photos of Hudson looking haggard as he left his former office, screenshots of his social media activity, even a picture of him meeting with the real estate agent, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. "Tick-tock, Hudson. 5 days left. Hope you're finding that money." Hudson tried to trace the emails, but they bounced through multiple proxy servers and encrypted accounts. Whoever was behind this knew what they were doing. Professional, methodical, untouchable. On Thursday morning, desperation drove him to do something he'd sworn he'd never do. He called his father. "Hudson?" Robert Blake's voice carried surprise and wariness. At 71, Robert had built and lost 2 small businesses, and his relationship with his son had been strained for years. "This is unexpected. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I know it's going to sound crazy. You need money." It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "Son, you haven't called me in 8 months. When a man in his 30s suddenly calls his father out of the blue, it's usually about money." "How much?" Hudson's throat felt raw. 50,000. The silence stretched for nearly a full minute. "Jesus Christ, Hudson. What kind of trouble are you in? I can't explain it all, but is this about Tina leaving because your mother heard from Barbara Martinez that she moved out, that you were running around on her?" The shame burned in Hudson's chest like acid. Even his parents knew about his humiliation. "Dad, please, I'm desperate." "Desperate enough to call the father you've barely spoken to since your mother's funeral? Desperate enough to ask for more money than I've got in my savings account?" Robert's voice was getting harder. What happened to the big-shot financial manager? What happened to the man who was too busy to visit his dying mother? "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Your mother spent her last Christmas wondering why her son couldn't find time to visit. And now you call me looking for a handout." Robert paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with disappointment. "I don't have $50,000, Hudson. And even if I did, I'm not sure I'd give it to someone who only remembers I exist when he needs something." The line went dead. Hudson sat on his couch, the same couch where he and Tina had watched movies, where they'd planned their future. where she'd curled up against him during thunderstorms and felt the last of his support systems crumble away. Friday evening brought another email from the blackmailer. 2 days left, Hudson. I'm starting to think you're not taking this seriously. Maybe your former neighbors would be interested in seeing these photos, or your ex-wife's new co-workers in San Diego. Hudson's blood turned to ice. They knew about Tina. They knew where she'd moved. The thought of these photos reaching her, of her seeing proof of how completely he'd betrayed their marriage, made him physically sick. He was still staring at the email when his doorbell rang. Through the peephole, he saw Dave Martinez again, but this time Dave wasn't holding a casserole. His expression was grim. "We need to talk," Dave said when Hudson opened the door. "If this is about the real estate showings, I told Rebecca to keep them discreet." "It's not about the showings, it's about the reporters." Hudson's stomach dropped. "What reporters?" "There's been a guy hanging around the neighborhood asking questions about you and Tina. Says he's working on a story about financial fraud at Davidson Industries." Dave stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Hudson, what the hell did you do?" "I didn't commit fraud. My personal life fell apart, but I never—" "This guy had photos of you with some woman going into motels. He showed them to Linda, asked if we'd seen anything suspicious about your behavior over the past year." The blackmailer was escalating. Not content to just demand money, they were actively trying to destroy what little reputation Hudson had left. The realization hit him like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just about money. Someone wanted to completely annihilate his life. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. But Hudson, other neighbors might not be so careful. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, she's been talking about how strange you've been acting, and you know how she loves to gossip." After Dave left, Hudson poured himself another whiskey and tried to think. The house sale wouldn't close for weeks even if he accepted the first lowball offer that came in. The blackmailer wanted money in 2 days. His father had made it clear that help wasn't coming from that direction, which left only one option, and it was the most humiliating of all. Meanwhile, in San Diego, Tina was having dinner with her new friend Caroline, a paralegal at the law firm who'd become something of a mentor in navigating single life after marriage. "You're glowing," Caroline observed over their shared appetizer. "I mean it. There's something different about you from when you first started at the firm." "I feel different," Tina admitted. "Lighter, I guess, like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale." "Any word from your ex?" "He's been trying to find me through mutual friends. My sister says he's getting desperate, calling everyone we used to know." Tina's expression remained calm. "I'm not interested in whatever crisis he's having now. That's not my problem to solve anymore." "Good for you. Too many women get sucked back into drama with their exes out of guilt or misplaced loyalty." As they talked, Tina felt a deep sense of gratitude for the path her life had taken. The divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly. Hudson hadn't contested anything, probably because he knew he had no leverage. Soon, legally and practically, she would be completely free. She didn't know that 300 miles north her ex-husband was sitting in his empty house, contemplating the one phone call that might save him from complete ruin, and trying to find the courage to admit that the person he'd thrown away was the only one who might help him now. Some lessons, Tina reflected as she walked along the beach that evening, can only be learned the hard way, and some people have to lose everything before they understand what they had. Hudson Blake was about to discover both truths in the most painful way possible. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzling, as if the Los Angeles sky itself was mourning Hudson's downfall. He sat in his kitchen with his phone in his hands, staring at Tina's contact information. He'd managed to get her new number through Jessica's boyfriend, who worked at the same law firm where Tina had found employment. The blackmail deadline was tomorrow. The reporters were circling like vultures. His house wouldn't sell in time, and his father had made it clear that bridge was burned beyond repair. Every door had closed except one. The one he'd slammed shut himself 8 months ago. Hudson's finger hovered over the call button for 20 minutes before he finally found the courage to dial. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He was preparing to leave a voicemail when Tina's voice answered. Calm, professional, completely different from the woman who used to worry when he was 5 minutes late from work. "This is Tina Blake." "Tina." Hudson's voice cracked on her name. It's Hudson." The silence stretched for so long that Hudson wondered if the call had dropped. When Tina finally spoke, her tone was measured and distant. "How did you get this number?" I asked around." "Tina, I need to talk to you. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm in serious trouble." "Whose fault is that?" The question hit him like a slap, but he pressed on. "I know I messed up. I know I destroyed everything good in my life. But right now, I need help." And you're the only person who— Stop. Tina's voice was firm but not angry. Hudson, let me save us both some time. Whatever crisis you're having, whatever consequences you're facing for your choices, they're not my responsibility anymore. I lost my job. I lost all my money. Someone's trying to blackmail me with photos from the affair. If I don't pay them $50,000 by tomorrow, they're going to ruin what little reputation I have left. Hudson waited for sympathy, for the caring response that Tina had always given when he was in trouble. Instead, he heard something that chilled him to the bone: complete indifference. And you're telling me this because I thought maybe you could help me. Maybe there's some way— Help you? Now there was emotion in Tina's voice, but it wasn't sympathy. It was incredulous anger. Help you clean up the mess you made while cheating on me? Help you pay blackmail money for the affair that destroyed our marriage? Tina, please. No, Hudson, you don't get to please me anymore. You don't get to call me when you're in trouble and expect me to fix things. That version of me, the woman who would drop everything to rescue you from your own bad choices, she died the night you decided our marriage vows meant nothing. Hudson felt tears streaming down his face. I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. But I loved you, Tina. I still love you. The laugh that came through the phone was unlike anything he'd ever heard from his ex-wife. It was knowing, bitter, and completely without warmth. You loved me? Hudson, if you had loved me, you never would have put me through the humiliation of finding out about your affair from credit card statements. If you had loved me, you wouldn't have spent months lying to my face while you snuck around with someone else. I made mistakes. No, you made choices. Every time you texted her, every time you met her at that motel, every time you came home and kissed me after being with her, those weren't mistakes. They were deliberate decisions to betray everything we built together. Hudson could hear the strength in her voice, the confidence of someone who had moved far beyond the pain he'd caused. It terrified him more than the blackmail, more than the reporters, more than losing everything. I've changed, Tina. I understand now what I lost. You understand that you're facing consequences, Hudson. That's not the same thing as understanding love or commitment or what it means to honor another person. Tina's voice softened slightly, but not with affection, with pity. You're not calling because you realize you made a mistake. You're calling because you're in trouble and you think I'll bail you out like I always did. That's not true, isn't it? When was the last time you called me when you weren't in some kind of crisis? When was the last time you wanted to talk to me just because you missed me, before you destroyed our marriage? The questions hung in the air like accusations. You treated our marriage like a safety net, Hudson, something to fall back on when everything else went wrong. But safety nets only work if you don't set them on fire. Hudson was sobbing now, ugly tears that came from somewhere deeper than embarrassment or fear. I don't know what to do. I've lost everything. Everyone hates me. I have nowhere to go. Then you'll figure it out, the same way I had to figure out how to rebuild my life after you demolished it. Tina's voice was steady, resolved. The same way I had to learn to sleep alone, to eat dinner by myself, to explain to everyone we knew why my husband had thrown away our marriage for someone who never cared about him. I'm sorry. God, Tina, I'm so sorry. I know you are. You're sorry you got caught. Sorry you lost your money. Sorry your affair partner turned out to be a con artist. Sorry the consequences of your choices are making your life difficult. Tina paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost gentle. But I don't think you're sorry for the person you chose to become. And until you are, until you understand that this isn't about bad luck or poor judgment, but about fundamental character, you'll never really change. Hudson tried to speak, but no words came. I hope you find a way through this, Hudson, I really do. Not because I want you back, that ship sailed long ago, but because everyone deserves the chance to become better than they were. But you have to do it yourself without dragging other people down with you. Tina, goodbye, Hudson. Don't call me again. The line went dead. Hudson sat in his empty kitchen for 2 hours, replaying every word of the conversation. The woman on the phone had been unrecognizable, confident, strong, completely beyond his reach. She'd spoken to him like he was a stranger, someone whose problems were of no concern to her whatsoever. And the worst part was, she was right about everything. He had loved the safety net more than the woman. He had called her only when he needed something. He had treated their marriage like a backup plan instead of a priority. And now, when he finally understood what he'd lost, it was too late to matter. The blackmail email arrived at sunset. Time's up, Hudson. Check your social media in the morning. Hope it was worth it. Hudson didn't even bother responding. He was beyond caring what happened next. The photos would surface. The neighbors would gossip, the reporters would write their stories. His reputation would be destroyed, his financial ruin complete. But somehow, after talking to Tina, none of it felt as devastating as it had before. The worst thing that could happen to him, losing her, had already happened. Everything else was just details. In San Diego, Tina set her phone down and took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not with fear or sadness, with relief. For months she'd wondered what she would say if Hudson ever called. She'd imagined different scenarios, different responses, different ways the conversation might go. But when the moment came, the words had flowed naturally, honestly, without anger or bitterness. She'd finally said everything she'd needed to say. Caroline found her on the beach an hour later, walking along the shoreline as the sun set over the Pacific. "You seem different tonight," Caroline observed. "Peaceful, but in a new way." "I got a call from my ex-husband," Tina said. "He wanted me to help him out of some trouble he'd gotten himself into. And I told him no. Not angrily, not to punish him, but because it wasn't my problem to solve anymore." Tina smiled, watching the waves crash against the shore. "For the first time since I left, I felt completely free. Not just legally or physically, but emotionally. He can't touch the life I've built anymore." "How does it feel?" Tina considered the question as they walked. "Like I finally understand the difference between loving someone and enabling them. Like I finally know what I'm worth." 300 miles north, Hudson Blake was learning the hardest lesson of his life, that some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt, and that sometimes the people we hurt the most find their strength not in forgiving us, but in refusing to let our problems become theirs. The real tragedy wasn't that Hudson had lost everything. It was that he'd only learned to value what he had after proving he didn't deserve it. Sunday morning brought the promised devastation with surgical precision. Hudson woke to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and a social media notification that made his blood turn to ice. "You've been tagged in 23 posts." The photos were everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, every platform bloomed with images of Hudson Blake's shame. The pictures were professionally cropped to show him clearly while keeping Deborah's face obscured, but there was no mistaking what they depicted. Hudson entering the Riverside Motel. Hudson kissing a woman who wasn't his wife. Hudson looking guilty and desperate as he left his former office building. But the captions were the real masterpiece of destruction. Sherman Oaks financial manager Hudson Blake caught an affair that ended his marriage and career. From Davidson Industries to motel rooms, the fall of a family man. Local man loses wife, job, and life savings to affair partner who disappeared with his money. The posts had been shared hundreds of times in just a few hours. Neighbors, former co-workers, old friends from college. Everyone Hudson had ever known was seeing proof of his complete moral collapse. His phone rang. Margaret Flores, Tina's friend from book club. "You disgusting piece of garbage," she said without preamble. "I hope you're proud of yourself." "Margaret, Tina's better off without you, and now the whole world knows it. Don't ever contact her again." The line went dead. Within minutes, his phone was ringing again. His former supervisor, Richard, his old college roommate. Even his dentist's office calling to reschedule his upcoming appointment. Each conversation was a fresh humiliation, a new confirmation that his social death was complete and irreversible. By noon, a news van had parked outside his house. Hudson watched from behind his blinds as reporter Susan Kim set up her camera on his front lawn. He recognized her from the local evening news, a serious journalist who usually covered city council meetings and school board elections. The fact that his personal disaster had attracted legitimate media attention felt surreal. The doorbell rang. Hudson ignored it. It rang again, followed by firm knocking. "Mr. Blake, this is Susan Kim from Channel 7 News. I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell your side of the story." Hudson pressed himself against the wall next to the door, as if hiding from enemy soldiers. "Mr. Blake, we're going to run the story either way. The photos and documents we've received paint a very specific picture. If there's context you'd like to provide, this is your chance." "Documents." Hudson's heart stopped. "What documents?" His phone buzzed with a text from the same anonymous number that had been tormenting him. "Check your email. Thought you might want to see what the media received." With trembling fingers, Hudson opened his laptop. The email contained copies of everything the blackmailer had sent to Channel 7. Photos, yes, but also hotel receipts, credit card statements, even screenshots of text messages between Hudson and Deborah planning their encounters. The most damning item was a timeline document that laid out Hudson's affair in clinical detail. Dates, locations, expenses, all cross-referenced with his work schedule and family obligations. Someone had constructed a comprehensive case study of his betrayal, complete with financial records showing how he'd paid for hotels and dinners with family money. At the bottom of the email was a note. Since you couldn't pay up, everyone gets to see for free. Enjoy your 15 minutes of fame. Hudson slammed the laptop shut and poured himself a whiskey with shaking hands. Outside, he could hear Susan Kim recording her stand-up piece, probably something about infidelity, financial ruin, and the consequences of moral failure. His phone rang again. This time it was Rebecca, his real estate agent. Hudson, we need to talk. I've had 3 potential buyers cancel their appointments today. Someone's been calling them, telling them about your situation. They're concerned about the property being associated with scandal. Can't you just... I'm going to have to withdraw the listing. I'm sorry, but my reputation is on the line here. This level of media attention, it's not something I can work with. Another door slammed shut. By evening, the story had reached regional news outlets. Hudson's downfall was being packaged as a cautionary tale about modern marriage, financial fraud, and the dangers of infidelity. The narrative was simple and devastating. Successful family man destroys his life for meaningless affair, loses everything to con artist, becomes local laughingstock. The irony wasn't lost on Hudson that his story was being told everywhere except by him. He'd become a character in other people's moral fables, a warning about the wages of sin that Sunday school teachers would reference for years. His phone had stopped ringing. The reporters had moved on to other stories. Even the social media posts were being buried under new scandals and trending topics. Hudson Blake had become yesterday's news in less than 24 hours. 300 miles south, Tina was having brunch with Caroline when her phone started buzzing with calls from Los Angeles numbers. "Aren't you going to answer?" Caroline asked. "It's probably about Hudson. Jessica texted me this morning that some kind of story broke about him in the news." Tina glanced at the caller ID and declined the call. "Whatever it is, it's not my concern anymore. Aren't you curious?" Tina considered the question while cutting into her avocado toast. 6 months ago, I would have felt responsible somehow, like I needed to understand or help or at least care about what was happening to him. She took a sip of her coffee and smiled. Now, it feels like hearing about the problems of a distant acquaintance. Sad maybe, but not my problem to solve. Caroline studied her friend with admiration. "That's real growth, you know. Most people can't let go that completely. I had to learn the hard way that you can't save someone who's determined to destroy himself, and trying to do it only destroys you too." Tina looked out the restaurant window at the San Diego Bay, sparkling in the afternoon sun. "The best thing Hudson ever did for me was make it impossible for me to stay married to him." Later that evening, Tina did finally look up the news story, not out of concern, but out of curiosity about how the narrative was being told. She read the articles with the detached interest of someone studying a case study about people she'd never met. The man described in the news reports bore little resemblance to the Hudson she'd married 8 years ago. That Hudson had been flawed, but not malicious, selfish, but not cruel. This Hudson, the one who'd systematically betrayed his marriage while hiding lottery winnings, seemed like a stranger wearing her ex-husband's face. But as she read, Tina felt something unexpected: relief. For months, she'd wondered if she'd made the right choice in leaving. She'd questioned whether she was being too harsh, too unforgiving, too quick to abandon their marriage. Now she saw her decision with perfect clarity. She hadn't left Hudson Blake. She'd escaped him. She'd saved herself from a man who was capable of deception she'd never imagined, cruelty she'd never suspected. The woman who had married Hudson would have felt sorry for him, would have wondered if there was something she could have done to prevent his downfall. The woman Tina had become understood that some people choose their destruction, and the kindest thing you can do is refuse to be buried in the rubble with them. That night, as Hudson sat alone in his dark house listening to the sounds of neighbors talking in hushed tones on the sidewalk, probably about him, he finally understood what Tina had tried to tell him. This wasn't about bad luck or poor judgment. This was about character, about choices, about the kind of man he'd decided to become when he thought no one was watching. The blackmailer had taken his money, but Hudson had handed over everything else himself: his marriage, his integrity, his reputation, his relationships. He'd traded them all for a few months of excitement with a woman who'd seen him coming from miles away. The worst part wasn't the humiliation or the financial ruin, or even the loneliness. The worst part was knowing that somewhere in San Diego, the one person who could have saved him from himself was sleeping peacefully, finally free from the weight of loving someone who hadn't loved her back enough to be worthy of it. Hudson Blake had gotten exactly what he deserved. The tragedy was that it had taken losing everything to understand what everything meant. 6 months later, Hudson Blake stood behind the counter at Pete's Hardware in Glendale, wearing a faded red vest and trying to look invisible. At 38, he'd gone from managing million-dollar portfolios to explaining the difference between Phillips and flathead screwdrivers, to weekend DIY warriors who treated him like he was part of the fixtures. The small apartment above the store was barely larger than his old walk-in closet, but it was all he could afford on his part-time retail salary. The house had eventually sold at a deep loss to an investor who specialized in distressed properties. After paying off the mortgage and debts, Hudson had walked away with $8,000 and a lifetime of regret. The media attention had faded after a few weeks, but the internet was forever. His name was still the first result when you Googled Los Angeles affair scandal, complete with photos and detailed accounts of his moral and financial collapse. Every job interview ended the same way, a polite rejection once they ran his background check. Pete Kowalski, the store's 70-year-old owner, had been the only person willing to hire him, and only because Pete didn't own a computer and didn't care about social media drama. "Blake," Pete called from the back office. "Customer needs help with plumbing supplies, aisle 7. Hudson walked over to find Mrs. Henderson, one of his former neighbors from Sherman Oaks, staring at pipe fittings with obvious confusion. When she looked up and recognized him, her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, recognition, and finally, poorly concealed satisfaction. "Hudson Blake," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I heard you were working here, Mrs. Henderson." Hudson kept his voice neutral, professional. "What can I help you find?" "I'm replacing the guest bathroom sink. The old one had issues." She studied his face like she was looking at a zoo exhibit. "You know, I always told my husband something was off about you. The way you'd leave at odd hours, come home looking guilty. Poor Tina, putting up with all that." Hudson felt the familiar burn of shame in his chest, but he'd learned to swallow it. "The sink fittings you need are right here. Standard size should work for most applications." "Is it true what they said in the papers about the lottery money and that woman who stole it all?" Mrs. Henderson wasn't even pretending to care about plumbing anymore. "Would you like me to ring these up for you?" "I ran into Tina's sister Jessica last month. She said Tina's doing wonderfully in San Diego. New job, new life, very happy." Mrs. Henderson's smile was razor sharp. "Some people land on their feet, I guess." Hudson handed her the receipt without comment and watched her leave, probably eager to spread the news to the rest of the old neighborhood that Hudson Blake had fallen even further than they'd imagined. That evening, Hudson walked to the corner market to buy groceries, a depressing routine that involved calculating whether he could afford both milk and bread in the same week. As he counted out exact change for a frozen dinner, his phone buzzed with a Facebook notification. Someone had tagged him in a post. Against his better judgment, he opened it. The post was from his old college roommate Derek, sharing photos from their 10-year reunion, an event Hudson had been conspicuously absent from due to his current circumstances. "Great catching up with everyone. Missing a few faces looking at you, Hudson Blake, but amazing to see how everyone's thriving." The photos showed his former classmates in expensive suits, talking about their successful careers and happy families. People he'd once considered equals, even inferiors, were now living the life he'd thrown away. In the comments, someone had written, "Wasn't Hudson that guy from the news with the affair scandal?" Derek had replied, "Yeah, rough situation. Hope he's doing okay." The casual dismissal hurt worse than outright mockery. He'd become a cautionary tale, a brief topic of conversation at social gatherings, the guy who'd had everything and lost it all through spectacular poor judgment. Hudson closed the app and deleted Facebook from his phone. There was no point in torturing himself with reminders of the world he'd been exiled from. Meanwhile, in San Diego, Tina was walking alone along La Jolla Cove, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold. She'd made this evening walk a ritual, a time to reflect, to appreciate how far she'd come, and to simply enjoy her own company. She paused at her favorite spot on the cliffs, feeling the ocean breeze on her face. A year ago, she'd been married to a man who was cheating on her, lying to her, probably planning to waste a fortune she didn't even know existed. Now she was here, completely on her own terms, watching the most beautiful sunset she'd ever seen. The solitude didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt powerful. For the first time in her adult life, every decision was hers alone. Where to live, what to eat for dinner, how to spend her weekends, what dreams to pursue, all of it belonged entirely to her. Tina considered how terrifying this freedom had seemed at first. After 8 years of marriage, she'd forgotten what it felt like to exist as just herself, not as half of a couple. But gradually she'd rediscovered pieces of who she was before Hudson, and discovered new parts of herself she'd never had the space to explore. She pulled out her journal, a habit she'd developed since moving to San Diego, and wrote, "The best decisions sometimes feel like the worst ones at the time. Leaving Hudson was terrifying, but it led me back to myself, and that's exactly where I needed to be." Tina felt the simple contentment of being exactly where she belonged, alone, strong, and finally free to build a life based entirely on her own worth and choices. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Saw Hudson working at a hardware store in Glendale. Looks rough. You dodged a bullet, sis." Tina read the message and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, not even curiosity. Hudson Blake had become a character in someone else's story, relevant to her life only as the catalyst that had forced her to find her strength. She deleted the message without responding, and turned her attention back to the sunset and the ocean, to the life she'd built entirely on her own terms. A life where her worth wasn't defined by someone else's choices or failures. Back in Glendale, Hudson was lying on his narrow bed, staring at the water stain on his ceiling, and thinking about the call he'd made 6 months ago. Tina's words echoed in his memory. "You treated our marriage like a safety net, but safety nets only work if you don't set them on fire." She'd been right about everything. He had loved the security more than the woman. He had called only when he needed something. He had taken her for granted until it was too late to matter. The hardest part wasn't the poverty or the humiliation or even the loneliness. The hardest part was the knowledge that he'd destroyed the best thing in his life for something that had never been real at all. Deborah had never loved him, had never even liked him. She'd seen a mark and played him perfectly, and he'd been too blinded by ego and lust to see the trap until it snapped shut. But Tina had loved him. Completely, unconditionally, faithfully. She'd built her life around supporting his dreams, and he'd repaid her devotion with betrayal. Now she was free, living on her own terms, discovering who she was meant to be without someone else's shadow covering her light. Hudson closed his eyes and tried to imagine an alternate timeline where he'd been smart enough to appreciate what he had, strong enough to resist temptation, wise enough to understand that no thrill was worth destroying a good marriage. But that Hudson Blake, the one who could have chosen differently, felt like a fictional character now. A better man wearing his face in a story that could never be rewritten. Tomorrow he would wake up, put on his red vest, and help customers find the hardware they needed to fix things. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his days helping other people repair what was broken while living with the knowledge that some things, once destroyed, could never be made whole again. In another life, in another world, maybe he could have been the man Tina deserved. In this one, he could only be the cautionary tale he'd earned through his choices, living with the weight of knowing that he'd had everything and thrown it away for nothing. Some lessons Hudson had learned too late can only be taught by loss, and some prices once paid could never be refunded. The man who had once managed millions now counted quarters for laundry money, and the woman he'd betrayed was watching sunsets with complete peace and freedom. Justice, it turned out, didn't always come with dramatic flourishes. Sometimes it was as quiet and inevitable as the tide, washing away castles built on sand while leaving stronger foundations untouched. Hudson Blake had learned the hardest truth of all, that love wasn't something you could take for granted without losing the right to it forever. And Tina, now just Tina Martinez again, had learned that sometimes the most devastating thing that can happen to you is also the most liberating. She was free, he was not. And that, perhaps, was exactly as it should be. 2 years later, the morning sun filtered through the small windows of Pete's Hardware, casting familiar shadows across the aisles Hudson had come to know by heart. At 40, he moved through his routine with the mechanical precision of someone who had accepted his circumstances without quite making peace with them. "Blake, we got a delivery coming in today," Pete called from behind the register. "Need you to handle the inventory." "Sure thing, Pete." Hudson had become reliable in his small role, punctual, polite, competent within the narrow confines of his reduced world. Customers who didn't know his history treated him with the casual indifference reserved for service workers. Those who recognized him from the old scandal usually looked away quickly, uncomfortable with the living reminder that even middle-class stability could crumble overnight. The morning passed quietly until a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Richard Fleming, his former supervisor from Davidson Industries. Richard looked older, grayer, wearing the expensive suit that Hudson had once considered his uniform. Their eyes met across the store, and Hudson felt the familiar clench of shame in his stomach. "Hudson," Richard's voice was carefully neutral. "Mr. Fleming, can I help you find something?" "Just picking up some screws for a home project." Richard studied Hudson's face, perhaps looking for signs of the ambitious financial manager he'd once known. "How are you doing? Really?" Hudson gestured around the small store. "This is it. This is how I'm doing. I heard about everything, the whole situation. I'm sorry it worked out this way. I'm not." The words surprised Hudson as much as they seemed to surprise Richard. "I mean, I'm sorry for what I put everyone through, but this is what I earned." Richard frowned. "That's a harsh way to look at it. It's an honest way to look at it." Hudson rang up the screws, his movements efficient and practiced. "I had everything a man could want, and I threw it away because I thought I deserved more. Now I know what enough looks like." As Richard left, Hudson reflected on the strange comfort he'd found in his diminished circumstances. The constant anxiety of maintaining appearances, climbing ladders, competing with colleagues, all of that was gone. What remained was simpler, harder in some ways, but undeniably real. His phone buzzed with a notification. Someone had sent him a LinkedIn connection request, probably a mistake, since his profile hadn't been updated in 2 years. He deleted it without looking and returned to arranging inventory. The afternoon brought its usual mix of contractors and homeowners, each with their small repair projects and weekend plans. Hudson helped them find what they needed, offered basic advice, and sent them on their way. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was honest work with honest people, and that counted for something. 800 miles south, Tina sat in the conference room of Murphy & Associates, reviewing case files for tomorrow's depositions. The law firm had promoted her to senior paralegal 6 months ago, recognizing her attention to detail and natural empathy with clients navigating difficult divorces. "Tina, could you stay a few minutes after 5? Asked James Murphy, the senior partner. "I wanted to discuss something with you." Later, in his office, James leaned back in his chair and smiled. "We've been impressed with your work here. Your client feedback is consistently outstanding, and your case preparation is meticulous. Thank you. I enjoy the work. I know you've mentioned being interested in law school eventually. Would you consider staying with us while pursuing your degree part-time? We'd be willing to adjust your schedule and provide some tuition assistance." Tina felt a spark of excitement, not the desperate hope of someone trying to escape their circumstances, but the quiet satisfaction of earned opportunity. "I'd like that very much." That evening, Tina walked her usual route along the beach, thinking about the conversation. Law school at 35 wasn't the path she'd imagined at 25, but it felt right in a way that her old life never had. She paused at her favorite spot on the cliffs and pulled out her phone. For just a moment, she considered sharing her news with someone, then realized with gentle amusement that she didn't need to. The achievement belonged entirely to her, and that made it more precious, not less. Her phone showed a missed call from Jessica, probably wanting to catch up on family news. Tina would call her back later after she'd had time to fully absorb this new possibility. The sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Tina watched until the last light faded, then headed home to her small apartment, her quiet evening routine, and the life she'd built one careful choice at a time. That same evening, Hudson was closing up the hardware store when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. "Hudson Blake?" The woman's voice was professional, distant. "Yes? This is Detective Sarah Rodriguez with the LAPD. We'd like to ask you some questions about Deborah Harris." Hudson's blood chilled. "What about her?" "We believe she may have been involved in similar schemes targeting other men in the Los Angeles area. We found your name in some financial records we recovered. Would you be willing to come in for an interview?" Hudson closed his eyes. Even now, 2 years later, Deborah's shadow could still reach into his carefully rebuilt routine. "When do you need me?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible. This is part of an ongoing investigation into financial fraud and identity theft." After hanging up, Hudson sat in his dark apartment and considered the irony. Deborah had finally been caught, not for what she'd done to him, but for the inevitable next victims who'd fallen for her carefully practiced lies. He felt neither satisfaction nor vindication, Only a tired recognition that some patterns repeat until someone with more resources than he'd had decided to stop them. The interview would be unpleasant, requiring him to relive his humiliation in official detail, but it was the right thing to do, and Hudson had learned to find purpose in small acts of responsibility. 3 months later, the newspaper article was small, buried on page 6 of the Metro section. Local woman sentenced in romance fraud case. Hudson read it during his lunch break, learning that Deborah Harris, whose real name was Michelle Torres, had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. The article mentioned that she'd defrauded at least 12 men over a 5-year period, stealing a total of over $3 million through elaborate romance schemes. Hudson was mentioned only as a Los Angeles area victim, his identity protected by the court. He folded the newspaper and finished his sandwich, surprised by how little the news affected him. Justice had been served in the abstract sense, but it didn't restore his lost money or repair his broken relationships. It was simply another ending to a story that had already concluded for him. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson came into the store again, this time genuinely needing help with a leaking faucet. She was polite but distant, treating him like any other service worker rather than a fallen neighbor. "Thank you," she said when Hudson found the right replacement part. "You've been very helpful." As she left, Hudson realized that even his notoriety had an expiration date. Most people had moved on to newer scandals, fresher gossip. He'd become invisible again, but this time by choice rather than circumstance. 1 year later, Tina graduated from law school on a bright San Diego morning, her family cheering from the audience as she walked across the stage. At 38, she was older than most of her classmates, but her life experience had given her a depth of understanding that served her well in family law. Murphy and Associates had offered her an associate position, starting immediately after she passed the bar exam. The salary was modest, but it came with the promise of meaningful work, helping people navigate some of the most difficult periods of their lives. That evening, Tina sat in her small apartment, her law degree propped against the window where it caught the last rays of sunlight. She thought about the woman she'd been 5 years ago, anxious, accommodating, defining herself through someone else's needs and failures. The journey from there to here hadn't been easy, but it had been hers. Every choice, every struggle, every small victory had belonged to her alone. Her phone buzzed with congratulations from friends and family, each message a reminder of the community she'd built through her own efforts. People who valued her for who she was, not for what she could provide or fix or forgive. Meanwhile, in Glendale, Hudson was locking up the hardware store for another day, his routine as fixed as the sunset. At 42, he'd found a kind of peace in his reduced circumstances. Not happiness exactly, but acceptance. Pete was retiring next month, and his nephew taking over the business had offered Hudson a full-time position with a small raise. It wasn't much, but it was stable, honest work that let him sleep without the weight of deception pressing down on his chest. As he walked to his apartment, Hudson passed the bus stop where he sometimes saw his reflection in the shelter's glass. A middle-aged man in work clothes, unremarkable and unnoticed. 5 years ago, that invisibility would have terrified him. Now it felt like a kind of mercy. He'd learned the hardest lesson life could teach, that some mistakes couldn't be undone, only lived with, and that living with integrity after failure was its own form of redemption, even if no one else was watching. The lights were on in his small apartment, just enough space for one person who'd finally learned the difference between what he wanted and what he needed. Hudson Blake made himself dinner, watched the news, and prepared for another day of small responsibilities, honestly met. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was the life he'd earned. And somewhere in San Diego, Tina Martinez was building a future that belonged entirely to her. Some stories end with dramatic reconciliations or sweeping reversals of fortune. This one ended with the quiet understanding that character once revealed creates its own consequences, and that dignity can be found in accepting responsibility for the life you've chosen to live. The rest, as they say, is what remains. A final message. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that mirror real life, where actions have lasting consequences, where character matters more than luck, and where true strength comes from within, not from external validation. Hudson Blake's downfall wasn't caused by bad luck or circumstances beyond his control. Every choice he made, to betray his wife, to hide his winnings, to prioritize his ego over his marriage, led inevitably to his destruction. He learned too late that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Tina Martinez's victory wasn't about revenge or dramatic comeuppance. It was about the quiet courage to walk away from toxicity, the strength to rebuild from nothing, and the wisdom to recognize that her worth was never dependent on someone else's ability to see it. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and fairy tale endings, this story reminds us that real transformation takes time, that dignity costs more than most people are willing to pay, and that the people who truly love us are often the ones we don't appreciate until it's too late. The lesson isn't complicated. Treat the people you love with the respect they deserve, because once you've proven you don't deserve their love, no amount of regret can earn it back. Some prices, once paid, can never be refunded. Tell us, have you ever realized too late that you took someone important for granted? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The end. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.